Today, we're going to decode one of history's most powerful and enduring stories, the Passover. We're going to unpack how a single night of terror and bloodstains became this incredible, timeless symbol of liberation and a totally new way of life. So let me just ask you this. Imagine for a second you're living in ancient Egypt. A final, absolutely terrifying plague is about to sweep across the land. And your survival, and the survival of your entire family, it all comes down to a single, very specific mark. Well, that wasn't a hypothetical. That was the reality on the night of the very first Passover. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at that night itself, the night of liberation. Then we'll dig into the symbol of blood, and after that, the idea of a new, unleavened life. From there, we'll see the massive shift from slaves to heirs. And finally, we'll talk about how this became a legacy for generations. All right, let's jump right in. We're rewinding the clock about 3,500 years. We're in Egypt, and the people of Israel have been enslaved for over 400 years. 9 really devastating plagues have already hit the country, and now the 10th and final one is on its way. God gave the Israelites a very clear, urgent set of instructions. 4 days before the big event, every single family had to pick out a perfect, spotless lamb and actually bring it into their home. Then, on the evening of the 14th day, they had to sacrifice that lamb and, this is the crucial part, paint its blood on their door frames. Why? Because at midnight, a destructive force, the angel of death, was going to pass through all of Egypt. And that, of course, brings us to the most critical symbol of the whole night, the blood. This wasn't just some sign to ward off evil. No, this was an active declaration. It was something that turned an ordinary house into a sanctuary. And get this, the instructions for how to apply the blood were incredibly specific. They had to dab it on 3 points: the top of the doorframe, the left side, and the right side. And what's just amazing is that thousands of years before the event it's believed to foreshadow, this act of protection literally traced the shape of a cross. You know, this is where the word Passover itself gets really interesting. The original Hebrew word Pasach, it doesn't just mean to skip over. A deeper meaning is to hover over, to shield, or to cover. So the image isn't God just strolling past the house. The image is of God actively standing guard at that doorway, defending the people inside. And this is where, for believers today, the past and present just click together perfectly. The literal blood of a lamb on a wooden doorframe back then is seen as this direct picture of the symbolic blood of Christ, often called the Lamb of God, on a wooden cross. One provided physical protection from death, the other is seen as providing spiritual protection from judgment. But the blood on the door was only half the story. The food they were told to eat that night was just as packed with meaning. They were commanded to get rid of something entirely from their homes and to eat a very special kind of bread. And that something was leaven, like yeast. In this context, leaven is a symbol for sin, for pride, for corruption. It's that thing that silently works its way through the whole batch of dough, puffing it up from the inside. They had to remove every single trace of it from their homes for a full week. And that's why the unleavened bread they ate, called matzah, is just so symbolic. First, it's unleavened, which points to a life without sin. Second, it's pierced with little holes all over it to keep it from rising, which is seen as a picture of Christ's body being pierced. And finally, when you bake it, you get these striped scorch marks, which are seen to represent the whipping marks on his back. So when you put it all together, the blood for protection on the outside, the pure bread on the inside, you realize this night was about so much more than just not dying. It was about a complete and total transformation of identity for an entire nation of people. I mean, we really have to stop and think about what their life was actually like. For 430 years, they were someone else's property. They had no rights, no hope for a future, no inheritance to give their kids. Their whole identity was just bondage. And then, in a single, dramatic night, protected by that blood on the door, everything changed. This was the moment their chains were shattered. And just look at that transformation. They went from slaves to being called God's firstborn son. They went from having no future at all to being promised an entire land as their inheritance. And here's the key. This brand new status wasn't something they earned. It wasn't about being good enough. The only condition was trusting in the blood on the door. That's it. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. God commanded that this incredible story of freedom should never, ever be forgotten. It was actually designed to be passed down and relived by every single generation to come. There's this powerful line from the traditional Passover celebration that really gets to the heart of it. It says, "In every generation, every person must see themselves as the one who walked out of Egypt." This makes it so much more than an old history lesson. It becomes a deeply personal, right here, right now experience of freedom. And that's because Passover is just as much about the future as it is about the past. Think about it. They ate that very first meal fully dressed, sandals on their feet, staffs in their hands, ready to go. It was a meal of preparation for the journey ahead, not just a memorial for the slavery they left behind. So it all started with a mark on a door, which led to a new kind of life and a legacy of freedom passed down for thousands of years. And that really leaves us with one final thought. What story of liberation, whether it's big or small, personal or something you share, are you carrying forward for the next generation?